talked about last week about heavenly authority. And I want us to understand that, again, that God has, or Jesus has, all authority in heaven and earth. And yet he uses it in a heavenly fashion. And he is in his kindness and his mercy. Now, just because Jesus is kind and merciful and compassionate and all of that, doesn't mean that in that authority that if we go contrary to it, that we're going to come out unscathed. Rather, that is totally the opposite. There is no way that we can run afoul of the authority of God and feel like we're going to survive all of this without problems and difficulties. And when we think about authority, God's authority in our life, I think one of the things that we can look to is how that God is ruling in our life through the Holy Spirit. And as we've talked about Pentecost, the coming of the Holy Spirit, and this certainly is a follow-up to all of that, because I want to talk about the instructions that the Apostle Paul gave to Timothy at a very difficult time in both of their lives. Difficult in terms of Paul's life because he was in prison. It was a time in which he obviously was ridiculed, and he realized that his life was coming to a conclusion. Not naturally, but he was facing death there in a Roman prison. And so he writes to Timothy, and he gives him direction as a young evangelist. And usually when we think about Timothy, we think about him as being a young fellow who was given a lot of responsibility. And in his statement to Timothy, I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn and things that we can take hope from, we can take encouragement. And what I want to read to you is what part of this letter, one verse out of this letter in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7, where the Apostle Paul writes to Timothy and he says, "For God did not give you a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline," or it's translated in the King James, "of sound mind." So this is Paul's exhortation to encourage and to counsel Timothy in the face of opposition, both to Christ, opposition to the gospel, and his own personal leadership. So you have to think about, as it were, the turning over of responsibilities because Paul wasn't going to be there. I'm going to suggest, though, that it is not unlike our present day society and the problems that we as Christians face. Because we do face. For us that are getting older, and I have now 2 days in my 70th decade, as we are getting older, we realize things are changing, and there's a younger generation coming on, and we're not going to be around forever. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I've talked about, come this November, I will have been here 20 years. 20 years from now, I will be 90 years of age. And Jeanette will be so much older than me, older at that time. Even Richard will be an old man by that time. I say that tongue-in-cheek. But there are realities that we face and we have to deal with. So it's not like the problems that we face in our world today. It is a time also when all seems to be under attack. With the Apostle Paul, he's facing the world, he's facing a society, he's facing all of these things. The church itself was under attack, the gospel was under attack. There were people who were advocating for themselves. They were, trying to gain power, gain people. All of those things were going on at this particular time. And at times when we are under attack, and I believe that without getting paranoid, we as Christians find ourselves under attack in this particular world. And it is interesting to me, it seems to me, of course, if you're on the side of being attacked, it seems as if the attackers don't play by their own rules. Even though they have rules, they don't play by their own rules. They tend to turn things on you, and it tends to be your problem, your difficulty, and you're the problem in all of these situations. As well, it appears that the attackers are also oftentimes, they're free to ridicule. they're free to malign, to accuse, to call you names. For example, oftentimes Christians are called bigoted. We're biased about things simply because we say, well, we have a belief that this is how God would want us to live life, that God has laid out laws and directions. Now, you have the choice to follow them or not to follow them. All that we're saying is that if you ask me how you think that I think that God would have you to live, how you ought to conduct your life, according to the Bible, and according to the things that Jesus has taught, this is what I believe. Now, you can take it or leave it, which is fair and okay, because we see that's exactly what God did in the Garden of Eden. He lays out the law. He lays out the garden. It is a great place, but he says, you have some choices here. He did that as well with Israel when he brought them out of Egypt. He says, I set before you this day life and death, blessings and cursings. And then he encourages them, choose life. So it is with this kind of thought that we look at our world. Now, Timothy, I think what we can draw from what we understand, Timothy appears to be the new kid on the block. That is, compared to the Apostle Paul. I am also going to suggest, and I'm not trying to be gender biased, but I think a reality, Timothy appeared to have been more influenced by both his grandmother and his mother, because Paul talks about them. He had a Greek father and a Jewish mother. And so Paul talks about and names both his mother and his grandmother and their influence in his Christian life. As well, Timothy appears to be a little more tender-hearted. I say that because Paul's talking about, the last time when we parted, Timothy, you were full of tears. You were crying. So Timothy, being a young person, being reared by mother, women, and all, just tends to be more tender-hearted in that regard, maybe a gentler so than the Apostle Paul. Now, the Apostle Paul is not a Clint Eastwood, but he's been through it. Okay? And what he's going to tell Timothy takes on a little different impact. I say that he's been through it. He has been beaten. He's been shipwrecked. He's been left for dead. He's been stoned. We're not talking drugs. He's been all of these things. He's been through it. So when you're facing trouble, and then of course he's been through it with the Jews, because he was a Jew and he was a prominent one, and in order to be a prominent person in the Jewish society and to be taught by Gamaliel to have that leadership, he had to be kind of a tough nut, so to speak, and pretty self-confident in his ability. And then, now he's persecuted by the Jews. He's persecuted by Christians as well. He's got other people trying to get his job, as it were, accusing him. He's in prison. He's got these problems. He has people in the government, and it's like, so you're going to threaten me with death? Hey, been there, done that. Timothy, on the other hand, is, I'm not sure about this, Paul. I haven't been beaten. Now, my grandma and my mom didn't beat me and the like. I haven't been through all of these things, and I haven't been through all this argumentation that you've been through. I haven't had the formal training that you've had where Timothy could say, well, I feel like I'm holy and blameless and all of these. So you got this young buck, as it were, and the Apostle Paul is trying to encourage him.
Feeling the blues today, or tired of life already? Do you have questions about life or need spiritual advice? The Worldwide Church of God is located in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto, California. We welcome everyone to attend our worship services with us every week at the times listed on your screen.